Data centers have now surpassed nuclear plants as the single most hated piece of infrastructure in the entire United States. Over 70% of Americans are against having one built in their area, and most of those people are very strongly against it. Now, despite that, the 5 biggest tech companies on the planet have committed over $700 billion to build them in 2026 alone. To put that in context, the entire Apollo program, which went so far as to put a human being on the moon for the first time in history, cost just $280 billion adjusted for inflation. We're spending more than twice that in a single year, making this the largest non-war infrastructure project in all of human history. Not only are data centers insanely expensive to build, but they're also having a massive negative effect on the communities that they land in. They drain and contaminate local water supplies, they spike electricity bills, they consume so much power that in some areas, residents actually experience brownouts. And if that's not bad enough, compared to the size of their footprint, data centers create almost no permanent jobs for the communities that have to live with them. Now, on top of all of that, in most states, these companies negotiate deals that allow them to avoid paying their fair share of local taxes. So the community absorbs everything and sees almost nothing in return. Now, we're going to go through all of this in detail. We're also going to take a look at what may be the single largest data center ever proposed in history, and it's being pushed into a community that wants nothing to do with it by Shark Tank's Kevin O'Leary. Now, something doesn't add up here. The public hates these things, they're terrible for the environment, they're bad for the communities they end up in, and they're widely hated, with over 70% of people disliking them. So how is this happening? That's what this video is all about. And by the end of it, you may start questioning if we're still living in that perfect democracy that the news keeps telling us about. Let's start by showing you exactly how these data centers are destroying the communities that they end up in.
This was the sound at Laura Evans' home in suburban Chicago last spring when backup generators kicked in at the data center 1,000 feet from her backyard.
And it never goes away.
Never goes away.
That sound those residents are describing, that persistent low-frequency hum that penetrates their walls and never stops. Imagine that was your neighborhood. Imagine it started tomorrow and it isn't going to stop tonight or ever, because that facility runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, permanently. You cannot sleep through it. You cannot sit in your backyard on a Sunday. You can never have a quiet moment at home again. Anyone who has ever lived near a highway or a factory knows what that kind of relentless noise does to you over time. It grinds you down. And the moment that facility fires up, every home in the neighborhood is worth a lot less. No one wants to move their family next door to a situation like that. Now that is just the noise. Add in what those generators are putting into the air. Those facilities burn diesel and natural gas around the clock to keep their backup systems running. And all of that exhaust gas goes into the surrounding community. A 2025 study found that chronic exposure to that level of diesel particulate matter is linked to elevated rates of respiratory disease and cardiovascular conditions in nearby communities. A separate model projects that US data centers by 2030 could be responsible for approximately 600,000 asthma symptom cases and 1,300 premature deaths annually, with a public health cost exceeding $20 billion a year. 10,000 diesel generators in one state, running every hour of every day. At Elon Musk's xAI data center in Memphis, Tennessee, those turbines were fired up without permits. A Time magazine investigation found that nitrogen dioxide levels had measurably increased from pre-construction baselines in the historically black neighborhood surrounding the facility. The people who lived there had no vote in any of it. Now the water.
This is the current drinking water in Morgan County, Georgia, right after the Meta data center was constructed. The only difference between the clean water and this was that data center. I have another one as well. Both of us can agree that neither one of these things are drinkable.
That was a member of Congress standing in a federal hearing room holding a jar of visibly contaminated brown water in front of the Environmental Protection Agency. That water came from Morgan County, Georgia, where Meta built a data center. Residents reported their tap water turned brown and murky shortly after construction began. Families started having water shipped to their homes for cooking and bathing. A typical large data center consumes up to 5 million gallons of water per day for cooling, and about 80% of that evaporates permanently and never returns to the local water system. Now the jobs, because every one of these projects gets sold to the communities on the promise of economic development. A 1.1 million square foot data center outside of Reno is projected to create just 73 permanent jobs over the next decade. That is a stunningly small number for a facility of that size, and most of those positions are maintenance technicians and cleaning staff. Those are not high-skilled, high-paid technology jobs that the pitch promised. The construction jobs are real, but they're only temporary. And when they leave, what stays is the noise, the air and water contamination, and the drop in property values, among other things. So we're building the largest non-war infrastructure project in human history, and the communities hosting it are getting almost nothing in return. The answer to why that keeps happening will come a little later in the video. But first, I want to show you a data center so massive, with an impact on its community so severe and so widely hated by the people who live there, that it makes everything we just covered look like a warm-up. It's the biggest data center ever proposed in American history, and it's being pushed forward by someone that you know from Shark Tank.
Concern and outrage in Utah,
For hell's sakes, grow up.
where hundreds of protesters this week flooded this meeting of Box Elder County Commissioners
Can you be quiet and let our citizens hear what needs to be said, please?
as they voted to move forward with a controversial data center proposal backed by celebrity Canadian businessman Kevin O'Leary.
The man behind one of the largest data centers ever proposed is Kevin O'Leary. And if you've seen Shark Tank, you know him as Mr. Wonderful, the investor who listens to regular people pitch their small businesses and then explains why their numbers are garbage before offering them a deal that mostly just works out for him. He has spent years building a reputation as the guy who is ruthless with other people's money. Now he wants to build a $100 billion data center campus, and it's being built in a place where almost no one who lives there wants it. The project is called the Stratos Project, but O'Leary prefers to call it Wonder Valley, which sounds a lot nicer than what it really is. The location of this data center is Box Elder County, Utah, a rural farming area with fewer than 60,000 residents. The plan is to take 40,000 acres of that county, which is roughly the size of Washington, D.C., and turn it into a data center campus with its own natural gas power plant attached. The power plant is designed to generate up to 9 gigawatts of electricity, which is more than double what the entire state of Utah uses in a single year. On May 4th, 2026, the Box Elder County Commission voted on whether to approve it. Hundreds of residents showed up to the meeting to say no. The room got loud enough that one of the commissioners told the attendees to grow up. Then the commissioners left. They went into a private room, they took their vote behind closed doors, and they approved the project unanimously, while the public who came to speak watched it happen on a live stream from outside. That is the response from the people who actually live there, locked out of the room while the decision about their own county got made without them. After the vote, residents tried the next thing available to them. They filed for a referendum to overturn what the county had done and put the decision in front of voters. But there was a catch. You see, the data center wasn't really a county project. It's being run through a Utah state agency called the Military Installation Development Authority, or MIDA. The county's only real job was to give its consent and to negotiate a few protections in exchange for tax money, like a rule that the developer has to actually hold valid water rights. Under state law, once the county hands that consent over to MIDA, it cannot take it back. So if residents won a referendum and repealed what the county did, they would not be canceling the data center. They would only be tearing up the county's own agreement, which is the part that holds the protections. The project would keep its state-level green light, and the residents would lose the few guardrails that they had. They could win the vote and walk away worse off than they were when it started out. Now, as it turned out, they did not even get that far. In late May, the county attorney rejected the referendum application outright, ruling that the commissioners' votes were administrative actions that are not allowed to go to a public vote in the first place. The organizers are appealing. The other problem is where all of this is going. The site sits right next to the Great Salt Lake. The Great Salt Lake is already in serious trouble. NASA data shows that it's dropped 22 feet since 1986, and you can watch it shrink across the satellite images. Now, a massive gas-powered data center is going right next to a lake that is already dying, and the developers are not even required to run a proper water quality study before they start construction. None of this makes any sense on the surface. A project this big, with this much at stake for the local water, is getting pushed through this fast and with this little scrutiny. Something does not add up here. When residents kept pushing back, O'Leary's response was to question whether they were even real. He posted on social media that 90% of the protesters were paid and bussed in from out of state. He also went on national television and suggested that the opposition was being funded by China. What a disgrace.
What's happening in Utah right now is we think over 90% of the protesters are actually not people that live in Utah or Box Elder County. They're being bussed in.
The Salt Lake Tribune fact-checked his claim that the protesters were bussed in and found that it was completely false. For someone who keeps painting his opponents as a threat to the country, O'Leary is the real one in this story who's behaving in an anti-democratic way. The residents used every legal public channel available to them, and they did all of it out in the open. O'Leary is the one who benefited from the vote being taken behind closed doors, and then turned around and called the locals who showed up paid actors and foreign agents. The person who's trying to shut down the democratic process on this is Leary himself. Now that's not only happening in Utah. Box Elder County is a part of a pattern showing up all over the country. In Festus, Missouri, the town council approved a $6 billion data center, and at the next town election, voters removed every incumbent who was up for re-election. In Saline Township, Michigan, the Planning Commission and the Township Board both voted the project down, and it got built anyways after the developer sued and the township settled. In Maine, the legislature passed an 18-month pause on new data center development, and the governor just vetoed it. People across the political spectrum are fighting these projects, and they keep losing, which raises the obvious question. The majority of Americans do not want these data centers, and they've tried everything the system gives them to stop it from happening. Yet, the projects keep being built regardless. Now, the reason comes down to money. And once you see how much of it is being spent and exactly where it's going, none of this looks like a string of bad local decisions anymore.
I knew I started to have to go for the lawmakers, and that's exactly what I did.
It turns out the professional lobby for big tech is taking note. Lobbyists for AI are now turning their attention to the 50 state houses, among the biggest. A group called TechNet, representing the likes of OpenAI, Anthropic, Meta, Amazon, Google, NVIDIA. Last year, TechNet boasted of trying to influence more than 800 pieces of state legislation and of getting its way 87% of the time.
They want to be the ones to write their own safety rules.
What you just heard comes from an NBC News investigation into how the AI industry works the government. The group at the center of it, TechNet, is the main lobbying organization for the biggest tech and AI companies in the country. According to that report, in 2025, TechNet pushed to shape 808 separate bills across all 50 states, and it came out on the winning side 87% of the time. That is nearly 9 times out of 10. When one industry's lobbyists win at that rate, the laws are being decided long before the public ever gets a vote. So when a town shows up and begs its local government to stop a data center and it loses anyway, the fight was rigged before it ever even started. Here's the first way they rig it: sheer numbers. A watchdog group called Public Citizen went through the federal lobbying records, and what they found is hard to believe. 1 out of every 4 lobbyists in all of Washington is now working on AI. Not 1 in 4 tech lobbyists, 1 in 4 of every lobbyist in the entire Capitol. There are more people being paid to push the AI industry's agenda in Washington than there are working on defense or healthcare lobbying. That is the army these companies have hired to stand between you and your own government. The second way they rig it is even dirtier, and it's the part that most people never hear about. Just look at who these lobbyists actually are. More than half of the people lobbying for this industry used to work inside the government themselves. They wrote the rules, or they worked for the people who wrote the rules, and now they get paid to walk right back into those same offices and lean on their old colleagues. And the door also swings the other way, which is even worse. When the Trump administration came in, it created a brand new role called the AI czar and handed it to a Silicon Valley venture capitalist named David Sachs. This is a man whose entire career was built on investing in these exact companies. When his time as czar ended, he did not disappear. He moved over to co-chair the President's Council of Science and Technology Advisors. And sitting on that council, right alongside him, was the CEO of NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, the CEO of Meta, Mark Zuckerberg, and the chairman of Oracle. The literal heads of the companies building these data centers are now advising the president directly on the rules meant to keep them in check. At that point, we can't even call it lobbying anymore. The industry is literally running the very offices that are supposed to be holding it accountable. Then there is the money, of course, the part you would expect. According to Open Secrets, companies like Microsoft and Oracle spent more than $226 million lobbying last year alone, and on top of that, these companies have poured close to $200 million into political action committees aimed at the coming midterm elections. Money whose only job is to reward the politicians who cooperate and bury the ones who do not. So, where are the politicians in all of this? A few of them make noise. Occasionally you see a senator float a moratorium, or a pair of senators from opposing parties put forward a bill to help your electricity situation. It plays well in a press release. But look at the results though. The projects keep getting approved. The protections keep getting watered down or vetoed, and the reason is simple. The same government those politicians work inside is the one the industry has already bought and staffed with its own people. The opposition to these data centers is real, and it does cross party lines, but it's coming from the ground up, from ordinary people in red and blue states. At the top, both parties have already taken the money. Even NPR has called the public's anger over data centers a possible tipping point in the coming midterm elections, because it's showing up in races all over the country. The people are furious. It is not translating into anything because the system above them is owned. So that is the answer to the question this whole video has been circling around. These projects do not keep winning because the public wants them. Clearly, the public doesn't want them. They win because the industry behind them has bought the lobbyists, leaned on the politicians, and in some cases, simply moved into the government itself. The people in these communities never had a fighting chance. Which brings us to the bigger picture, and the part I want to leave you with.
I want to warn the country of some things that give me great concern. And that's the dangerous concentration of power in the hands of a very few ultra-wealthy people. And the dangerous consequences if their abuse of power is left unchecked. Today, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead.
Now, that was President Biden in his farewell address, warning that the country was sliding towards an oligarchy run by a handful of tech billionaires. Now, whatever you think of Biden, just look back at the story you just watched and ask yourself whether or not he was wrong. This isn't just about data centers. The data center is only the part of the problem you can see and hear. Underneath it is something simpler and far more dangerous. A small group of extremely rich people have decided that they no longer need the public's permission, and when the public says no, they have the money to just override that. Now, here's the part that should frighten you. In a working democracy, when a clear majority of people do not want something, it can't be forced on them. That's the whole deal. The people fighting these data centers have the majority on their side, and they've used every legal tool in the process that they possibly can, and yet they still lose every single time. When the public does everything right, and the outcome never changes, you're not really looking at a democracy anymore. You're looking at an oligarchy wearing a democracy's clothing. A country where the people with the most money get their way no matter how anyone votes. The worst part is how open it's become. The billionaires sit on the president's own advisory councils in plain sight. The spending is filed in public records for anyone to read. Now, these same data centers are quietly becoming the backbone for a new wave of mass surveillance, and that's going to be the subject of one of my next videos. It's going to be here soon, so hit subscribe so you don't miss that. One last thing before I go is an update and a genuine thank you. A lot of you know that this channel got demonetized a few weeks back, flagged for so-called inauthentic content. Now, every appeal that we had filed was swiftly denied. But after we put out our report on this a few weeks ago, YouTube went ahead and reversed that decision, and we're now remonetized. I don't know exactly how that happened, but I have a feeling that some of you out there may have had a hand in it. And to everyone who watched, commented, shared, and stuck with this channel, thank you. I mean it. Without you guys, there would be no channel. To YouTube, credit where it's due. You made the right call. My advice going forward, however, put real humans back in charge of support and appeals, because that's what works. That's it for this one. I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to hit subscribe and like, and I'll see you guys again soon. Have a great night.